Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Storytime with Uncle Monkey. I am your Uncle Monkey, and today's story is Puss in Boots. There once was a miller who had 3 children, and when he died, he divided what he possessed among them in the following manner. He gave his mill to the eldest child, his donkey to the second, and his cat to the youngest. Each of the children accordingly took what belonged to them without the help of an attorney who would soon have brought their little fortune to nothing in law expenses. The poor young fellow who had nothing but the cat complained that he was hardly used.
My brothers, said he, by joining their stocks together may do well in the world, but for me, when I have eaten my cat and made a fur cap of his skin, I may soon die of hunger.
The cat, who all this time sat listening just inside the door of a cupboard, now ventured to come out and addressed him as follows. "Do not thus afflict yourself, my good master. You have only to give me a bag and get a pair of boots made for me so that I may scamper through the dirt and the brambles, and you shall see that you are not so ill provided for as you imagine." Though the cat's master did not much depend upon these premises, he had often observed the cunning tricks Puss used to catch the rats and mice, such as hanging upon his hind legs and hiding in the meal to make believe he was dead, and other cool tricks that he pulled to sneak up on his prey. So he had the boots made. When the cat had obtained what he asked for, he gaily began to equip himself. He drew on the boots, and putting the bag around his neck, he took hold of the strings with his forepaws, and bidding his master to take courage, immediately sallied forth. The first attempt Puss made was to go into a warren in which there were a great number of rabbits. He put some bran and some parsley into his bag, and then stretching himself out full length as if he were dead, he waited for some of the young rabbits, who as yet knew nothing of the cunning tricks of the world, to come and get into the bag, and better to feast upon the dainties he had put in there. Scarcely had he lain down before he was succeeded as well as he could wish. A giddy young rabbit crept into the bag, and the cat immediately drew the strings, and killed him without mercy. Puss, proud of his prey, hastened directly to the palace, where he asked to speak to the king. On being shown into the apartment of his majesty, he made a low bow and said, "I have brought you, sire, this rabbit from the warren of my lord the Marquis of Carabas, who commanded me to present it to your majesty with the assurance of his respect." This was the title the cat thought proper to bestow upon his master.
Tell my lord Marquis de Carabas, replied the king, that I accept of this present with pleasure, and that I am greatly obliged to him.
Soon after, the cat laid himself down in the same manner in a field of corn, and had as much good fortune as before, for 2 fine partridges got into his bag, which he immediately killed and carried to the palace. The king received them as he had done the rabbit, and ordered his servants to give the messenger something to drink. In this manner he continued to carry presents of game to the king from my lord the Marquis de Carabas, once at least every week. One day, the cat having heard that the king intended to take a ride that morning by the river's side with his daughter, who was the most beautiful princess in the world, he said to his master, "If you will but follow my advice, your fortune is made. Take off your clothes and bathe yourself here in the river, just in the place I shall show you, and leave the rest to me." The Marquis de Carabas did exactly what was desired, without being able to guess what the cat intended. While he was bathing, the king passed by, and Puss directly called out as loud as he could bawl, "Help! Help! My lord Marquis de Carabas is in danger of being drowned!" The king, hearing the cries, put his head out at the window of his carriage to see what was the matter, and then, seeing the cat who had brought him so many presents, he ordered his attendants to go directly to the assistance of the Lord Marquis de Carabas. While they were employed in taking the Marquis out of the river, the cat ran to the king's carriage and told his majesty that, while his master was bathing, some thieves had run off with his clothes as they lay by the river's side, the cunning cat all the time having hid them under a large stone. The king, hearing this, commanded the officers his wardrobe to fetch one of his handsomest suits and present it to my lord the Marquis de Carabas, at the same time loading him with 1,000 attentions. As the fine clothes they brought him made him look like a gentleman, and they set off his person, which was very comely, to the greatest advantage, the king's daughter was mightily taken with his appearance, and the miller's son had no sooner cast upon her 2 or 3 respectful glances than she became violently in love with him. The king insisted on his getting into the carriage and taking a ride with him. The cat, enchanted to see how well his scheme was likely to succeed, ran before to a meadow that was reaping, and said to the reapers, "Good people, if you do not tell the king, who will soon pass this way, that the meadow you are reaping belongs to my lord the Marquis de Carabas, I shall be forced to chop you as small as mince meat." The king did not fail to ask the reapers to whom the meadow belonged. To my lord Marquis de Carabas, they all said at once, for the threats of the cat had terribly frightened them.
"You have here a very fine piece of land, my Marquis," said the king.
"Truly, sire," replied he, "it does not fail to bring me every year a plentiful harvest." The cat, who still went on as before, now came to a field where some other laborers were making sheaves of the corn they had reaped, and he said to them as before, "Good people, if you do not tell the king, who will presently come this way, that the corn you have reaped in this field belongs to my lord the Marquis de Carabas, you shall be chopped into small pieces as small as mincemeat." The king accordingly passed a moment after, and inquired to whom the corn he saw belonged.
"To my lord, Marquis of Carabas,"
they answered very glibly, upon which the king again complimented the Marquis upon his noble possessions. The cat still continued to go before, and gave the same charge to all the people he met with, so that the king was greatly astonished at the splendid fortune of my lord the Marquis de Carabas. Puss at length arrived at a stately castle which belonged to an evil ogre, the richest ogre ever known, for all the lands the king had passed through and admired were the ogre's. Puss took care to learn every particular about the ogre and what he could do, and then asked to speak with him, saying as he entered the room in which he was, that he could not pass so near his castle without doing himself the honor to inquire after his health. The ogre received him as civilly as an ogre could, and desired him to be seated. "I have been informed," said the cat, "that you have the gift of changing yourself into all sorts of animals, into a lion or an elephant, for example."
"That is very true,"
replied the ogre.
"And to convince you, I will directly take the form of a lion."
The cat was much too terrified at finding himself so near a lion that he sprang from him and climbed to the roof of the house, but not without much difficulty, as his boots were not very fit to walk upon the tiles. Some minutes after, the cat perceived that the ogre had quitted the form of the lion, and he ventured to come down from the tiles, and owned that he had been a good deal frightened. "I have been further informed," continued the cat, "but I know not how to believe it, that you have the power of taking the form of the smallest animals also. For example, of changing yourself into a rat or a mouse. I confess I should think this is impossible, for you are much too large."
"Impossible? You shall see."
And at the same instant, the ogre changed himself into a mouse and began to frisk about the room. The cat no sooner cast his eyes upon the ogre in mouse form than he sprang upon him and devoured him in an instant. In the meantime, the king, admiring as he came near it the magnificent castle of the ogre, ordered his attendants to drive up to the gates, as he wished to take a nearer view of it. Puss, hearing the noise of the carriage on the drawbridge, immediately came out, saying, "Your Majesty is welcome at the castle of my lord Marquis of Carabas."
"And this splendid castle yours also, my lord Marquis de Carabas? I never saw anything more stately than the building, or the most beautiful than the park and the pleasure grounds around it. No doubt this castle is no less magnificent within than without. Pray, my lord Marquis, indulge me with a sight of it."
The Marquis gave his hand to the young princess as she alighted, and followed the king, who went before. They entered a spacious hall, where they found a splendid collation which the ogre had prepared for some friends and had that day expected to visit him, but who, hearing that the king with the princess and a great gentleman of the court were within, had not dared to enter. The king was so much charmed with the amiable qualities and noble fortune of the Marquis de Carabas, and the young princess too had fallen so violently in love with him, that when the king had partaken of the food and drunk a few glasses of the wine, he said to the Marquis,
"It will be your own fault, my lord Marquis de Carabas, if you do not soon become my son-in-law."
The Marquis received the intelligence with 1,000 respectful acknowledgments, and accepted the honor conferred upon him, and married the princess that very evening. Puss became a great lord, and never after ran after rats and mice, but for his own amusement. The end.